she comes up and she asks, "What's your badge?" And I say, "What's Border Patrol?" And she gave me this odd look, and she says, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's Border Patrol." And I thought it was going to be like, "Oh wow, you guys are getting a hard time. It's Border Patrol." I was expecting like a hoorah. And she looked at me and she says, "You're the enemy." And she says, "You're the enemy."
Really?
And I said, "What do you mean I'm the
Oh,
enemy?" And she says, "You guys are destroying people's lives. You are deporting people that shouldn't be deported, people that simply want a better life."
hey, it's Lou Pimber, author of the book Breaking Badly, My Very Own Post-Traumatic Success Story. Hey, if you got it on Amazon or maybe at a book signing, thank you. Thank you for supporting. If you've written a review, thank you. I see them. I share them whenever I get a chance. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Today, by the way, welcome to Lou Pimber Speaks. Welcome to Lou Pimber Speaks. We have very special guests here. We have very special guests, a gentleman that I've been kind of following on the network, stuff like that, a fellow Arizonan. And we have Mr. Art del Cueto. Welcome, Art del
Boom!
Cueto. How you doing today, bud?
Knocked it out of the park, Lou. I made the comment earlier. I always, when I do these, whether it be news, podcasts, you never know, right? You are the only one that has ever said the last name perfect. So thank you.
Eso, man.
Usually
Right
I
on,
say,
man.
"Well,
Well,
that's
welcome.
close enough. That's close enough. That's close enough."
That's funny, man. By the way, Art is a retired United States Border Patrol agent. And he's been all over the place. He's been on Fox News. You've been on Univision. You've been on Telemundo. Wow, Telemundo, all over the radio shows, podcasts. Thank you so much for giving me the time today, Art. I appreciate that. Who is Art del Cueto, man? How did you get involved? How did you get involved in the business of being on the news? By the way, hang on. I brought my own cowboy hat
There
today.
you go.
So,
There you go, Lou.
how does it? How do I just need the goatee, right? I need the goatee. I need the
See,
look
and I'll
or
tell
the
you what, you're
mustache.
probably doing it better. You're probably doing it better because it's the summer months, and that's probably the more appropriate hat that people should be wearing.
Yeah. Well, but look, there can only be one cool guy with the cowboy hat. So I'm gonna leave it up to you, bro, because that is your brand. That is your
Thank you,
stilo
partner.
right there, brother. So welcome, Art del Cueto, man. Talk to me. What's going on in the news? What's going on in the world of the with the U.S. Border Patrol? What's happening, bud?
Well, I mean, so much, right? I mean, you hear on the news that everything's perfect, everything's locked down, but people. So we work off of percentages. So when you're seeing that
Yeah.
the numbers are tremendously down in Texas, then you got to turn around and compare them to Arizona. So the numbers are still low, but Arizona. I mean, I'm telling you, Arizona has always been that hotbed for the amount of illegal aliens that are coming into the United States. It continues to happen. I spoke at an event yesterday and they were asking me about it. They were saying, "Well, what's up with all the smugglers?" I tell people, look, show of hands, and I always do this. I said, show of hands, how many of you have your kids or grandkids that are in the same profession as you are? And you always get like one person that raises your hand. And I said, if you ask that in a room full of smugglers, the whole room goes up. The smugglers that work in Mexico, they've been doing it for generations, for their whole lives. So just because
Yeah.
there's more security at the border, they're not going to go moonlight and do something else, right? I mean, they're not going to start like a
Right.
Mexican band. They're going to continue to figure out how to bring drugs across. So
Right.
it's still happening. They're more creative, Lou. So they're back to the old ways of sticking the drugs inside the gas tanks, body carriers. They're seeing more body carriers at the ports of entries. There's still distractions so they can go ahead and cross somewhere else, especially in
Yep.
Arizona where the terrain is not flat. People think, oh, it's a desert, it's flat. Uh, Particularly out of the Tohono O'odham Nation, that's an area where you have all these hills and mountains and washes where people go in between the dry riverbeds to bring across, so it's hard to detect them. So you're still getting groups come across, though it's so much more minimal than it was before, but they are saying
Got
that they're still getting about 35 gotaways a day.
Wow, okay. Got
So,
it.
I mean, that's still a big
That
number, I think.
look, look, Mexicans, bro. Look, I was born in Mexico, okay? So,
What part? What
Mexicanos,
part? Let's talk about you. What part of Mexico?
no, Nogales, Sonora, bro. Nogales,
So
Sonora,
I
dude.
was
Yeah.
born in Mexico myself. People don't know that. I was actually
Where?
born in
Where in
Mexico.
Mexico?
I was born in Mexico. A lot of people they don't think I was born there, or they go back and forth. One person said he's not from the border. He said, and he wasn't born on the border. He grew up in Douglas. And I said to myself, grab a map, dude, because that's like as close to Mexico as you can get. Um, so I
Oh
was born in
yeah. Oh
Mexico. I
yeah.
derived citizenship from my father. My father was a U.S. citizen. Well, my father's
Mm-hmm.
family was originally from Spain, but my dad became
Okay.
a citizen long before I was born. I was born in Mexico. My mom's family is from Mexico. I still have family down there, and so I grew up right on the border. Even though people say no, he didn't. He grew up on in Douglas. So I guess to other people on the border means I grew up like hanging out on the fence, back and forth. And you know that because
Yeah,
I mean you're
yeah.
in Nogales, right? I mean, so it's the same
I
thing.
was
We grew up on the border.
yeah. Yeah,
But
man. Yeah.
Douglas is weird, and I say these things, and some people get offended. But I got to be honest. So the different vibe between Douglas and Nogales, I think, is Nogales has a lot more commerce, and
Yes.
the port of entry. It's a main route into the United States. It's a main route, to
Yes.
get through to Phoenix. Douglas is kind of on its own, so there it isn't so much commercial. So I think there's more like ranches on the Mexican side. They come to Agua Prieta and they purchase stuff, or they go to Douglas. So Douglas has always had a different vibe. And here's a strange fact that I tell people: Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta is the only border town where a caravan never came through, and people don't realize that. And the reason being is it is so controlled by the cartels that they did not want that extra attention with caravans. You had caravans in El
Eh,
Paso, Nogales, Tijuana, even down in Y. You had them throughout Laredo, Eagle Pass, but not a single caravan came through Agua Prieta and Douglas. And that's because the cartel said, not here, we don't need the attention. So it's always been a
That's
different vibe.
interesting. That's an interesting fun fact. I didn't know that. For those who don't know what a caravan is, can you explain them what a caravan is from your point of view?
Right. So it's just a group of individuals that are trekking to the border. They could be from all over the world, and they come. It's what it says, right? It's like a caravan. It's a bunch of them walking. Some of them are in vehicles. Some of them are getting transported to the border so they can cross. But a lot of times, what they do is once they get to where they're going to cross, that's when the smugglers are going to take over and say, "Okay, now I'm going to separate you." And I'm going to say, okay, this group crosses here, this other group crosses somewhere else. That's the added distraction on our borders, so they could eventually cross drugs or something else that they want to cross, or even people of special interest. So a lot of times they're not going to mix a lot of individuals from China or from the Middle East with people from Central America because that delays the process as they're crossing. So that's why you see a lot of times a lot of the people from like China that have crossed in San Diego, a lot of the people from the Islamic Republic of Mauritania have crossed down in the Ajo area by Y, and so on. You got the Brazilians and Cubans that cross in El Paso, Texas. So it's the smugglers that separate it, and they do it on purpose.
There is a science behind it. It's pretty well thought out. They're pretty sophisticated the way they smuggle people. You're absolutely right. Can you describe that in more detail for the person for the person who's up north in the United States, or maybe in the central states who don't
Right,
they see the end result, right? But they don't understand the process. And look, I'll be the first to say a lot of mojaditos that cross the border illegally, right? I'll be the first to say, a lot of them do. They're just here for a better life, man.
right.
They in their mind, they think they're doing it just for a better life. But what happens is many of them get exploited, they get extorted, they end up in all sorts of problems, end up in all sorts of issues. Describe that in more detail, please.
You're right, Lewin. And unfortunately, they don't realize that to a point they're helping the drug smuggling organizations because they're being utilized as that pawn to do the distraction. Like I said, okay, now I feel more comfortable because I know you understand the Mexican sayings. But there's a very saying that they say, "Tanto peca el que mata la vaca que el que le coge la pata," right? So the guy that holds the that kills the cow is committing the same crime as the guy that's holding the foot of the cow before it gets killed. Is basically
That's
what it
right.
roughly translates to, and that's what it comes
Correct.
down to. Is they use these people as a distraction so they can bring more drugs into the country. Some of them don't realize that, but it's very thought out. And I'm glad you said that because some people think that it's just a bunch of knuckle draggers that are out there and oh, you make it to the border and oh, I'll cross you, I'll cross. It used to be that way. Like I ain't gonna lie,
Uh-huh.
growing up on the border, I know it used to be that way, but now it's become so sophisticated that a lot of these groups they go down into like poor neighborhoods in different areas of the world and they exploit these people. I've seen some individuals that have come across and I asked them, well, where did you get the money? Because there's always this nonstop of none of these people have money. They have to be indentured servants. They have to deal drugs for the cartels. That is true to a point, but not as much as people tend to believe. So a lot of times they go to these neighborhoods, they go to these areas where they know people can easily be exploited, and some of them have properties, even if it's small properties, whatever it may be, right? But if you go to a
Right.
village and you have 6 or 7 families that have properties, well, what the cartels and the smuggling organizations say, don't worry about your property. You're going to make so much more money in the United States that some of them, the way they pay the smugglers is they sign off these properties. So they sign off some of
Wow.
their land or small properties that they have to the cartels, which doesn't sound like a lot, but all of a sudden these smuggling organizations they have 6 or 7 properties, so now it's one huge property that they own. So it's very organized. They know how to recruit. They go down south, they do this recruiting, and then they bring them across into the United States. But all the routes are taken care of. So they say, okay, you're going to go from point A to point B. Once you get to point B, you're going to get to this other area. And I'll use Altar Sonora as an example. There was a time, and there still is, when you can get to Altar, and the smuggling organizations they have their I like to call them their get ready bags. So they got their get ready bags that's already has their Pedialyte. They have some medication in there for pain, which is usually they use what's called Sedelmerc, which is a horrible medication that does numb and it gets rid of the pain, but it also dehydrates them. So that makes it worse as
Mm.
they're crossing through the desert. So these packages, these backpacks, they have they have all the different sizes already marked. So when the people that are getting crossed, it's kind of like an assembly line. Here's your bag, here's your bag, here's your bag. So their bag is a camouflage bag. It carries carpet shoes, and carpet shoes is just what it sounds. It's like a booty, like a medical booty almost, with the bottom being made out of carpet, and they put them over their shoes. That way, it leaves less of an impression when they're crossing the border in the dirt.
Right.
It's harder for agents to track. So these bags have the carpet shoes. They have full outfit of camouflage. They have like water. They have a couple of snacks. They end up having some mirrors for they put mirrors in these in case they get lost. They flash the mirrors from one mountain to the other sometimes when it's
Right.
hard to get
Right.
service. So they have everything pinpointed out. It's like I said, look, it's not a bunch of knuckle draggers. People think, oh, it's just a bunch of It's not. These
Right.
individuals have built these smuggling organizations similar to a Fortune 500 company, and they go about it in a very business sense.
America is definitely the land of opportunity, and for some people, they've really taken advantage of it. And they know that if they get them across the border, let's talk about the coyotes, right? The smugglers, right? They get them across the border, they're going to make some money, and then a lot of these people end up in some way working for them to a degree, if they can. Those that can, who they're able to exploit to do that, and then it's a mill. It's just a constant running mill of people that are being smuggled, and very dangerous work. I've been out by the border. I've seen the burlap sacks. I've seen the carpet shoes. I I've ran into people and I've talked to them. And you know the will of the people that come. I have to give them some props, bro. I have to give them props because their will is it's an incredible will. They don't know how they're gonna get across, but they're
Right.
very clear on why they need to get across. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you
No,
ask them
you're
a
right. You're right. And it's a hard situation, especially us that grew up on
yes.
the border and we've
Yeah.
seen, what's gone back and forth. I'm going to share a story. I was recently in Washington, D.C., and I was out there for Police Week. So there's law enforcement from all over the world, not just from all over the
Yeah.
U.S., from all over the world.
Oh, okay.
And I go to the lighting of the vigil at night, where it's the lighting of the candles. The next day
Yes.
there was an event and a dinner. I was there for a little while with a couple of friends, and then I left and I went to a cigar bar. I smoke cigars. That's the one bad habit, I guess, that I do have. So I
Nice.
went to a cigar bar, and there was a couple of other agencies there at the same restaurant and cigar shop, and I was wearing a suit, and on my lapel I had a lapel pin which was the Border Patrol badge. One of the individuals that was in the other table, they came over to where I was sitting. Now I'm not going to name the department because I don't want to like destroy the whole department over one person's bad attitude, but it was a department out of Florida. So she comes up to me and she says, "What is that badge?" And we're talking, it was so packed, maybe like 3 feet away was where her table was, where with the other people she was with, and she was with about 15 other individuals. I was by myself. And so she comes up and she asks, "What's your badge?" And I say, "What's Border Patrol?" And she gave me this odd look and she says, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's Border Patrol." And I thought it was going to be like, "Oh, wow, you guys are getting a hard time. It's Border Patrol." I was expecting like a hoorah. And she looked at me and she says, "You're the enemy." This was another law
Really?
enforcement officer. And she says, "You're the enemy."
Really?
And I said, "What do you mean I'm the
Oh, yeah.
enemy?" And she says, "You guys are destroying people's lives. You are deporting people that shouldn't be deported, people that simply want a better life." And I asked her, I said, "Where do you live?" And she named the city in Florida where she lived. And I said, "Do you have a nice home?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Do you have a swimming pool?" And she said, "Yeah, but I don't know what that has to do with anything." I said, "Well, I don't have a swimming pool, and I really wish I had one. So is it okay for me to move into your house, and just go into one of your bedrooms, decide to sleep there and live there? But don't worry, I'm going to pay you some of your rent money, and I'm going to buy my own food, though I'm going to use your refrigerator. Is that okay with you?" And she said, "Well,
Right.
you're hitting too close to home." I said, "Exactly." I said, "That's the
Right.
point I'm trying to make. I don't have a swimming pool. Why can't I just come into your home and stay in your house?" And it's because it's yours, and there's certain ways that you got to vet people coming into your home. I said, "Our nation's borders are the exact same way." And then she did say, "Well, how about when you arrest people with children, you separate the children?" Immediately. How about when you arrest a drunk driver and there's kids in the back seat? Are you going to take the
Right.
kids and throw them in the same drunk tank with their parents, or are you separating the children? Or do you ever call CPS when kids are being mistreated? So there, we have to break that, mentality and be able to
Right.
talk about the issues. And it's more difficult for you and I, right? And I got to compare you and I on this because we are Hispanic and we are of
Right.
Mexican descent. So people
Si,
can
senor.
come to you, they come to me. I know you've heard it because I've heard it. I've heard the word vendido. I've heard,
Yes.
obviously they call it bootlicker. Uh, the last one I heard was Uncle Juan, which is a derivative of Uncle Tom. So
Right.
we
Right.
hear
Right.
these things, and people don't
Right.
understand there's a way to do things lawfully. So I
Right.
always have to come
I
back and explain things to people that way. When it's people from Mexico that come at me, I ask them, last time a Mexican federal pulled you over, or a police officer in Mexico, did you complain to him when he was asking for a bribe? So it's the same thing. And people don't understand
no.
that. They don't like the argument.
They don't. You're absolutely right, man. I mean, I was in Mexico. I mean, I've gone many times, of course, right? And so they are very diligent in making sure that when you cross the border, they check your paperwork, and you better get a permiso and they want to know where you're going to stay, right? And if you want to live there, there's a long list. There's a checklist that requires you have to meet to be able to immigrate into Mexico. They want to know where your finances are. They want to know all these things about you, so you don't become a burden to their state,
Right.
a burden
That's what
to
it
their
comes down
country.
to.
It makes total sense. You're absolutely right. There's a reason why we have doors, why we have fences and things like that. Totally get it. And unfortunately, some people get exploited. They're sold the dream that the land of opportunity. But the thing is this: we have to have borders. We have to have certain restrictions, like the what you told this person in Florida. Listen, I can't just go use your house just because I want to. You know what I mean?
Right.
You have to knock on the door. You have to ask for permission. And listen, I was in Mexico. I was down by San Luis. I was in San Luis Potosí. Okay, I was on a I was on this protection assignment one time, right? And I contract stuff, and I accidentally ripped my permiso. Okay,
Oof.
and I okay, a little piece of paper, and I caught hell twice. Once because when I showed him my passport, he goes, "Had you been flying on a Mexican passport, you're Mexican born," he says. I say, "Yes, sir."
Right.
"Had you been flying on a Mexican passport, right now I wouldn't be giving you a hard time." I go, "What happened?" "You ripped that permiso." "Well, I put it back together with tape." "I know, that's called fraud. You just altered a legal Mexican document." I was like, "Damn." He didn't let me get on the plane. And let's just put
Wow.
it
He
this way,
actually
I
didn't
sat
let
at
you
the
get on the
airport.
plane.
No, I had to sit there and from it was at 06 in the morning. I wasn't allowed on the plane. I had to sit there till 9 o'clock at night until the next guy came on shift. In the meantime, I'm trying to negotiate. In the end, in the end, I had to pay a fine. Let's just say it cost me some
An
money,
in-person
right?
fine. That's what I say. Can I pay the fine here and avoid all the red tape?
Yeah, yeah. It took. I mean, I had to really make sure I was treading on light on some deep water there, right? And I had to pay the fine, brother. As we say, una buena mordida, I had to pay it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so it cost me some money, right? But I made it back. And he says to me, he goes, "We have laws too," he says. I said, "Bro, I totally get it. I didn't out it wasn't my intention to commit a fraud and put I
Right.
was trying to fix this piece of paper. I realized I ripped the wrong piece of paper," I said. Nonetheless, listen, we have to enforce those laws. A nation without borders, a nation without laws is not a nation, right? And that's the job of you guys, ICE, enforcement, border patrol, stuff like that. The back to the point with that officer, who shame on her for even thinking that way, right?
Right.
For talking about the separation of families and all that sort of stuff. We didn't ask them to bring the kids that way. They brought the kids. Now they're exploiting their own children, and
Right.
and as law enforcement, they have to be separated and they have to be
Lou, and
put
that's where
in their
some of the
proper
issues come
location.
up. You
Yep,
you hit a very good point. Is look, Border Patrol, ICE, DHS, their job is to arrest people that have violated immigration laws. But it puts it also on regular law enforcement. They have a job to do as well, and we should work hand in hand. And I think that's what's been the most frustrating thing for me, especially recently, is that I've seen the attacks on Border Patrol. I've seen the attacks on ICE, not just at the facilities, but when they're doing this targeted enforcement. And where is local law enforcement? And I don't want to pick on them because I know it's not the boots on the ground. I got a lot of friends that are in law enforcement, and they tell me right off the bat, hey, it's not us, it's our leadership. Our leadership doesn't allow us to get involved. I have some horror stories of the border patrol agents that were out in Los Angeles where, yeah, people talk about the shootings in Minnesota. I'm going to tell you, there could have been way more shootings that were actually justified in California, but it wasn't done because of the restraint of the border patrol agents. But they literally did not get enough help from other agencies, and I point the finger directly at the leadership of those agencies. Look, when you have somebody that's getting attacked, when you're getting people that are throwing bricks, throwing rocks, blocking traffic, when they're emptying dumpsters and getting material out of dumpsters and blocking people inside their offices so they can't come out, how is it that you're not arresting these people? And then when you do arrest them, how is it that you're not prosecuting them? The reason people are getting away with things in this country is because we're not prosecuting. You'll hear
right.
arrests all day long. Arrests don't mean nothing unless you prosecute somebody. And one example I like to use is a lot of people, they drive faster than the speed limit when they're out on the highway. The reason
Right.
you slow down isn't because the police officer or the highway patrol is going to pull you over. You're slowing down because when he pulls you over, there's that possibility of having to pay a fine. Not the same fine we pay in Mexico where it's in person. We actually have to take the day off and go pay it at an office. So I think that's the reason we're seeing what we're seeing. How many times have we seen these individuals that get arrested that you hear they attacked a law enforcement officer, they did this, they did that, and all of a sudden you hear, well, protesters came, they released them. There's even one video of a guy that was throwing objects at an agent. He got arrested. Then they show him when he's being detained. He's actually crying in the detention center. Well, 2 weeks later, he's back at a protest site. Why is he back at a protest site? Because somebody failed to prosecute him. And that's where we're losing ground.
Art, let me ask you this, man. You got involved in Border Patrol early 2000s, right?
Correct.
And so
So,
from then versus now, like then versus now, what's the biggest difference that you've seen? Of course, other people were in charge in 2004. Who would that have been? That was Bush, probably, right?
Bush,
Or was
correct.
it Bush, right?
The biggest
So then,
difference is I can't run the quarter mile the same anymore. Other than that, look,
well, you
this is
can't
what I
run with a
tell
cowboy
people.
hat either.
So I wore the cowboy hat when I first started my career.
Yeah.
Maybe like a couple of weeks in, I was wearing a cowboy hat. And I had one of those old timers come up and says, "You haven't earned that cowboy hat. You can't wear it." Um, yeah, you know how it is, that like ribbing. Well, I looked
Yeah,
at the
yeah, of
guy
course.
and he was cool. He was cool. He was just like, hey, feeling me out. And I
Yeah.
told him, well, I don't see anyone here that's gonna take it off of my head. That easy, bro. I was a
Yeah,
trainee.
yeah.
I had 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks in the field. Um, I was one of those weird cats, I think, where before I joined the Border Patrol, I worked a maximum security state prison.
Okay.
So I had already gone through an academy. I had already gone through, like, I had dealt with the worst of the worst, like real criminals, like
Yeah.
murderers, rapists. I mean, like guys that will, they will shank you across the neck over a cup of coffee. So I
Mhm.
had dealt with really bad guys. So when I came to the patrol, I was very happy to be here because I grew up on the border. I always wanted to be border patrol. I would see them, and they were always heroes of mine, right? So
La migra.
I love them, bro. It's similar to when you hear the old uh, the Lou Gehrig when he says, "I'd like to thank the good Lord for making me a Yankee." You know what?
Yes.
I thank God every day for allowing me to wear the uniform of my actual heroes growing up. And so it was a
That's
big
awesome,
deal to
brother.
me. So when I'm finally in the border patrol, I'm wearing a hat. I got a little bit of crap for it, but eventually when I told the guy that, he says, "Hey, you're all right, yada yada yada, right?" And I was cool. And I've always worn it, but then when I started working as a representative for the bargaining rights, I would do interviews and they didn't like me wearing the hat. So I wouldn't wear the hat, right? Because you got to be more uniformity when you're on TV, and I
Right.
get all that. Um,
Right.
and then slowly but surely, when I'd be out and do interviews out in the field, I would wear the hat. I'm bald. Some people know that, some people don't. I am like completely bald. So that's
Yeah.
kind of why I wear the hat, because I don't want to get like burned. I don't want to get like marks. I'm scared of skin cancer. So I've always worn the
Yeah.
cowboy hat. And even as a kid, I would wear a cowboy hat. Sometimes I've posted pictures. I should find more and post them on my social media.
Yeah.
I used to play in a heavy metal rock band, and
Cabrón,
I
which
would
band
always
was
wear a
that, bro?
cowboy hat because I liked the cowboy hat because my mom's family are all ranchers. So to me, it was always
Okay.
cool. So I
Yeah,
always
yeah,
wore the
yeah.
cowboy hat. I mean, when it's not appropriate, I hadn't worn it. But now I'm at a point now where, like, I don't care. I'll wear the cowboy hat every day, whether people like
That's
it or not.
awesome. That's your mark, bro. You branded that thing, brother. So then versus now, right? Back then, obviously the numbers were much bigger, and then they got even bigger in the Biden into the Obama
Right.
administration, and then even worse during the Biden administration. Um, Look, my feeling, and it's obvious, they they want to have bring in more people. I understand there's a need for immigration, well, let's do it legally, right? And so,
right?
what was it like then enforcing then versus what it is today? Can you give us some
I
examples on
think the
that?
biggest difference when I first started was that we would catch groups and we would VR them, which was a voluntary return to Mexico. So you would fingerprint
Right,
them, and if they had any priors, you'd have to go through deportation or if they had warrants. But if they didn't have any of that, we would just release them back, put them on a bus, take them back to Nogales, for example, and then a couple of days later you would catch them again. I caught the same
right.
woman once when she was 2 months pregnant, 4 months pregnant, 5 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and finally when she was about to deliver the child. And it was
Wow.
through when early in my career. One of the things is I knew certain areas where I would pinpoint where traffic would come through. So we would do what's called laying in back then, right? So you would find an area where the trail was, and I remember laying in there one night by myself, right? But it was near one of the forward operating bases. I laid in there and I caught over 300 people. So a group of 20 would come across. I would catch them. We would be in the drive riverbed. I would tell them to get down, and then I would hear the other group coming across. At the end of the day, it was over 300 people, and I would just call in the bus. The bus would come, load the individuals, take them to process, and then I would walk back into that wash and wait for the next group to come across. So it was nonstop. Finally, one of the supervisors said, "Hey, you filled up all the detention areas. Your shift is almost over. Go ahead and drive back home." Because of the amount of groups that I was catching. People still sometimes go back and forth and we laugh about that with some of the old timers that were there and remember it. But you would catch people and you would send them back and you'd probably catch the same person 2, 3 times. When Obama came into office, believe it or not, the numbers dropped a bit and there was more enforcement because we would be streamlining, we would be doing interior repatriation. Streamlining, you would catch the first group and you would if you caught them in Arizona, sometimes you would go deport them in Texas and vice versa, and that was to separate them from the smuggling organization they were involved in. Then you had interior repatriation, where you would catch people and you would fly them into either Guadalajara, Mexico City, and I forget the other spot, but there was different parts in the interior, and then that would make it more difficult for them to try to cross again, as opposed to just dropping
Right.
them all off in Nogales, Agua Prieta. 2 days later they resupply and come across. So that's what was going on during the first Obama administration. When the second Obama administration came in, things got more relaxed, right? It was more back into the hey, you can ask for asylum. They understood that process, and they would get released. It was more difficult to be able to arrest these people. It was always difficult, though. This is what I need to add. It was always difficult to get prosecutions on drug smugglers, and that I think is the biggest frustration for a lot of agents. Early in
Explain.
my career,
Can you repeat that again, please? It was more
it was
difficult to what?
to prosecute drug smugglers, to
Hmm.
get prosecutions, and that was always what was very, very upsetting to a lot of the agents. We had a meeting early in my career. They shut down the station that I was working at, and they had the two stations next to us overlap and work that area. And what they did was the chief had a meeting, and I don't even know why the meeting was held, but there was obviously issues, but one of the questions that all of a sudden one of the agents asked was, "Why are we arresting people with 300 pounds or 400 pounds of dope and they're not getting prosecuted?" And the chief was very vocal and he says, "That's not happening. Raise your hands if you've heard of that." The whole state, every agent there raised their hand.
Wow.
He turned
So
around
they
and
didn't
looked
know.
at the chief. They didn't know. He looked at the chief of the station and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" The chief of the station tells the sector chief, "They're not accepting our prosecutions. That's the problem." So then, these are the most famous words that I had heard early in my career. The chief of the sector says, "That stops today. If you guys see this happening again, where people aren't getting prosecuted for loads of 300, 400 pounds, you call me and I will make sure that those people are prosecuted."
Wow.
Well,
That's
that night,
huh.
we caught a load of 400 pounds of dope. And guess what? The guy still didn't get prosecuted. And for years after
Wow.
that, they continued not prosecute. That's when you realize a lot of it is lip service, and it's
Well,
frustrating.
did it
And
come
that's, I think, what
from
frustrates the agents.
orders from Washington down to the U.S. Attorney's Office to not prosecute?
I think it's the U.S. attorneys because everything you would always, when you would call them on it and question them, they'd always say, "Well, it fails to meet prosecution guidelines." And I said, "Well, what are these guidelines that we're failing on?" And it would be something really stupid, Lou. If you
Yeah,
saw the group come across the border with the drugs on their back, and then you chase them, and then they drop the load, which most of them do, and then you catch
right.
them without the load, and then you come back to pick up the load that you saw them carry, the AUSA would say, when you caught them, did they have it on them? And it's
Jeez.
like, no, but I
Possession,
got all the
possession.
evidence that possession. So
My
they
God.
wouldn't prosecute him, which is crazy to me.
Wow. Wow, wow.
And
And
it's
it was
crazy
an
because
era.
you have kids. No, you have kids in high school that if they get caught with a joint in their locker, their lives are ruined forever. Which,
Right,
I don't promote or agree with any type of that drug use, especially illegal drug use. But
right.
I mean, just got to make sense of it.
Yeah, yeah, interesting, I didn't know that. So, you mentioned a key phrase, asylum, right? Describe what asylum is for those who don't know what asylum is, and how it's been, and why it's given, and then how it's been taken advantage of, how it's been exploited.
So there are cases where, asylum is just how the word says, look, you are having difficulties in your country. You're being exploited. You may come from a country that has terrorist ties or there's terrorists there in your country. So there are reasons for this asylum because you absolutely can no longer live in that country. Sometimes it's the government is persecuting against you because of your own political or religious belief. So there's many reasons why you can ask for asylum and try to get legal asylum. I will say, monetarily it's not the reason. So I mean, I can't get a job or jobs are better in America. That's not a reason for asylum. So there is areas where you can ask for asylum. You go through a process. They see if you qualify, and if you qualify, you go through the proper steps to remain in the United States and get legal citizenship at some point after you've been a legal resident for many years. Where it's gotten exploited, particularly even more so during the Biden administration, is you have to hear every case of asylum. So instead of people coming across the border, and once you detain them and you say, well, what's your reason for asylum? Well, I'm not making any money where I work in Mexico or whatever country they're from. There should be a way to say, okay, this guy automatically is disqualified and you send him back. However, through the red tape and your hands being tied, what was happening during the Biden administration is, okay, yes, you're right. This person does not qualify. However, it is not your job to determine that. So we're going to allow him to wait and actually see an immigration judge or wait and see an asylum officer or an asylum adjudicator where they're going to go through the actual process and listen to their case. The government, the Biden administration, they were very much aware that these were not real asylum cases that could go through. However, they said, we're going to wait and have somebody else determine it. Once they did that, it opened up the floodgates where everyone from around the world said, all I have to do is ask for asylum. They're going to release you. And that's why we had millions of people come across. Then you have the smuggling organizations and the cartels get smart about it as well and say, well, wait a minute. Heck, this is perfect. We'll bring big groups of people in one area. They're all going to ask for asylum. So potentially they're all going to get released in the United States. We, as a or drug smuggling organization, now we don't have to use stash houses. Now we don't have to worry about transporting them around any of the checkpoints because all they have to do is say asylum. In the meantime, once we do that, there's other gaps on the border because agents are going to be preoccupied with these big groups. Now we can cross fentanyl, heroin, meth, and start moving it forward. During the Trump administration, the first one, okay,
Mhm.
one fentanyl pill. That's when fentanyl, started getting big back during Obama, but then Trump came into office. One
Right.
fentanyl pill was right around $1 street value for a pill of fentanyl. During the
Okay.
Biden administration, that price dropped to almost 15 cents per pill. That is
Wow.
because
Okay,
of
that
how
says a
much
lot.
we were flooded with fentanyl in the
Wow.
country.
The supply was high.
It's huge, and it still is.
Wow, 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 wow. And so what is the burden of proof? Who has the burden of proof to verify whether this person qualifies for asylum? Obviously, what all they had to say at that point was say asylum, and so then
Asylum
was the burden of proof
on
on the government or on them to prove it?
on them, but the
Right.
cases were so far off, right? And this is where people don't get it, because you're going to get argument from a lot of the individuals that are open borders on the left. They turn around and they say, you guys keep saying that these people don't go to their initial, or they don't go to their asylum court case,
Hearing.
and that's a
Yeah.
lie. Well, this is where the problem is. Their initial asylum court case, Lou, is while they're being detained. So of course they're going to their initial one, because we're the ones taking them to that court case. It's the ones afterwards. That's why explaining things to people is so important. Is if you sit there and say, well, they're not going to their court cases, they're going to come back with statistics and show you and say, look, yes, they are. And now what do you have? You don't have an argument. But it's not
Mm,
an argument. The debate is, they go to their initial one because law enforcement is taking them to their initial one because they're under detention at that point. When they go
got
to
it.
their
Got
initial
it.
one, the judge is saying, hey, look, we need to look at this further. There needs to be due process. Here's a list of attorneys that you can contact. In the meantime, because groups are still coming in, I can't hold you. So I'm going to release you. Make sure you show up to the following court cases. That's where the
Right.
breakup was.
I see. So just the strength was in their numbers, and the staffing on our side was our weakness, and the U.S. attorneys also was kind of a weak link there as well. It sounds like.
Right. Yeah. And the asylum officers, they could have, or judges, they could have seen that court case and looked at it and say, hey, what is your evidence that you need asylum? Is this your only bit of evidence? Okay, you know what? I'm not going to release you in the United States. I'm just going to deny you the asylum because you don't have an actual asylum claim. It's not viable. So I'm going to send you back. That was a big hiccup across the board when the groups that were coming. And then again, then you had to deal with the gotaways. So when people sit there and say, you know, 5 million, 6 million, whatever million they throw out that came across during the Biden administration, I honestly, that is 100% the wrong number, because they were able to see how many people were coming and asking for asylum because obviously you had them detained. But there is zero way, and I'm telling you, zero way to know how many people got away. And the reason is,
Right.
from personal experience, I'd be working on the field, and these people, as we've already mentioned, they would wear carpet shoes. They would walk one behind the other. And if you came across this group, you would see it, and then you would say, okay, well, I'm on a group of 20 plus. That was what you would say, 20 plus. If you did not catch that group, the only thing that was written down on paper was 20 people got away. I
Wow.
personally went after a 20 plus group, and I ended up catching the group, and it was well over 50 people in that group. If I would
Wow.
not have caught them, the only thing that would have been written is 20 people got away.
So that's a very interesting point. The gotaways. You know, you hear on the news X number of gotaways. So that number is just an estimate based on
Yes.
20 at a time. So
Ben
that
sent
number is obviously
that's actually it, Lou. That's how ridiculous the got away numbers are.
wow, 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 wow. You know, a lot has been on the news about ICE enforcement, right? And you
Hmm.
get people who are quick to jump to the conclusion that they're undertrained, they're not properly trained, and stuff like that. Look, let me just bring up one point. They're right to a point. You're right. They're not trained to deal with crowds. They're not trained to deal with such pushback because had it been done right, ICE shows up to enforce a warrant or detention of someone, right? And generally speaking, local police shows up to assist.
Right.
provide the peacekeeping mission of that, while ICE investigators, special agents show up and infect the arrest. And so we'll give you that one. We'll give you that. Okay. However, that is of no fault of their own, because they're just there to do a job to pick someone up who was unlawfully here or who violated their detention, their stay. Right now, on your side, from what you've been hearing and stuff like that, what's been the feedback you've been getting on these ICE enforcements in the streets, stuff like that? What have you seen?
So this is what it's come down to many times, and we just had an incident in Tucson recently where it made the news that a DACA recipient had been arrested.
Carla,
When yeah, see, but what they don't tell you is they weren't going after Carla; they were going after
right,
Carla's illegal alien husband from Venezuela. And when he saw
right,
them, he ran in the house. ICE went after him, and she
mm-hmm,
somehow stopped them or held them or pulled them, whatever. That's all considered an assault. People have this
right,
weird mentality that an assault means I'm going to pound you to the ground. No, that's battery
correct,
at that point. Just if somebody gets in your face and starts yelling at you, and you believe they're going to hit you, that's already assault. It's not battery, but it's assault. And people need to understand the difference. So what's happening is with a lot of these situations is ICE is going to targeted enforcement areas where they know people are here that haven't either shown up to their court date or they have prior criminal history and they're aware that they're there through investigations. The problem is
mm-hmm,
here. If they go into a home and they're going after one guy and all of a sudden there's 30 other people in that home, and let's say 25 of those 30 don't have legal documents to be in the US either, they can't ignore it. So what happens
correct.
is now you're having to arrest the other people in
Every
that household. Those other people in the household may not have an extensive criminal history background, but they're still here illegally in the country.
cor-
And that's what's
correct.
been causing all this back and forth. And I'm using Carla's incident as a prime example. The people, the media, everyone else, all they continue to see is these agents in full riot gear going into this home, and next thing you know is they arrested this girl. But they don't tell you they were going after somebody else. Where's the husband been throughout this whole thing? How come we haven't talked about his criminal history or his record or how he was here? That's who they were going after. But the ring camera
Mm-hmm.
only shows you that. Also, the body camera footage from the agents that was taken while they were inside the home, that hasn't come out. Why? Because the case is still under investigation. That's where Border Patrol and ICE have that don't have the upper hand, is they cannot release all that to the public until the investigation is completed. By then, every single person out there has already made up their own personal mind of who's guilty and who's not guilty, and they continue to push that type of narrative.
The other thing too is this: the people aren't used to seeing Border Patrol beyond those 21 kilometers of the border, enforcing
Right.
actively enforce. They're not used to that. What is that title that will they activate Border Patrol to come into the further inland? What is that title again?
Is,
Do you recall the
are
title?
you talking Title 8?
Title 8, yes.
I believe it's Title 8.
That was
I'm out of the
reactivated. Is
game.
that
I'm
correct?
crappy with the titles, buddy. I just know what they can do. Uh,
It is Title 8. It is Title 8.
yeah. Look, that's why we have checkpoints at the same time. They're further in the interior. There's corridors that are utilized constantly from smuggling organizations to get through. This is the best way I describe it. Is for all the football fans out there, if your defense is constantly set up for the run, then you're going to get a good passing team that's going to beat you each and every time. So you
Right.
can't just set up for the run. You got to make sure that you have people on the outer posts. There's been some chiefs at the time though that have said everyone has to go to the line. Everyone to the line. No one leaves the line. And I'm thinking, man, like, so what happens when someone gets by you? What happens when someone's on the freeway? You're not
Right.
going to be able to apprehend them. So that's why I think it's very important. You've brought up like
So
a great point though.
using
You've
Go ahead. Go
spoken
ahead.
about when they do these type of operations, you need to have cooperation from local PD, man. I mean, local
Right.
PD has to be able to be there, but that falls on the mayors, on the chiefs of police, and the sheriffs of a lot of these counties.
And so so using the football analogy, so basically back in the day, if they if Border Patrol caught them at the line of scrimmage, right? You
Right?
caught them. That's like the
You're
checkpoint,
good.
right? But once they made it past the line of scrimmage into the outfield, that now becomes the job of customs, immigration enforcement, and that sort of thing. But now
And
they've
they're
allowed Border
limited,
Patrol.
Blue,
They
but
are,
they were
yes.
limited. You
Eh,
you didn't have you don't have
yeah,
the man they don't have the manpower. I'm telling you.
they
Now you're
don't.
seeing it
They're
now, but they don't.
right. They're like an investigative branch of customs, right, and immigration.
Absolutely.
And there's yeah, and so once they made it past that quote unquote line of scrimmage, it now became the problem of the community for those that were criminals and
Yes.
committing criminal acts. And so, but now that line of scrimmage has been pushed out a little bit, right? So that now Border Patrol La Migra, if you will, is able to operate within city limits, if you will, right? People
Correct.
aren't used to that. People aren't used to that. And so, but
They're
we had to
not.
do that with mere numbers, mere numbers.
Yeah, because of the
Carlos
millions
Oviedo.
that came across.
That's right. You were gonna say something, and I cut you off. Go ahead, buddy.
I don't even remember what I was going to say. I'm all over the place,
All
Lou.
good.
Uh,
It'll
I
it'll
can
come
tell
back.
you,
It's all
look,
good. This is a great
we
conversation,
need
man.
to
Go
have
ahead.
enforcement across the board, but we need to work together. And like I've said it before, that's been part of the problem is that you have border patrol out there, and you don't have sometimes the assistance from local agencies because of their leadership. This is what I was going to say. I remembered. So we're talking about how customs and ICE and they don't have the numbers. ICE is a new um, group, right? So when I first joined the Border Patrol, DHS wasn't even developed.
Right.
It was all separate. Then DHS, we all fell under the same umbrella. But this is what people need to understand. Even though everyone works under DHS, the academy is completely different. And I'm not trying to knock on them in any way, shape, or form because I got a ton of friends that work at the ports of entries. But when I went to the academy, that's when I noticed the difference. I went to the academy in Glencoe, Georgia. I went to the academy before they developed an academy in New Mexico, and there was a ton of other agencies there. We had Fish and Game, we have U.S. Marshals, we had Customs, we had Immigration, Border, the IRS. We had the IRS there. There was everyone was there training in FLETC in Georgia, and that's when you realize that there are some differences. And again, I'm not knocking those that work at the port of entry. However, the standard, the physical standards for them were completely different than the physical standards for border patrol. And people
Yeah, I
need
heard
to
it's
understand that
pretty rough. Yeah.
it was different. And at the same
Yeah.
time it was on us as well, right? So sometimes border patrol agents would go work and assist people at the port of entry, and we weren't aware that we could pretty much go through the entire vehicle without having any type of probable cause. But then they would
Right.
come help us at the checkpoint, and we had to explain to them you can't just go through the vehicle, you have to have some kind of reasoning to do it. So the
Right.
standards, physical standards, are completely different. So there is a big difference in it, and people need to understand that just because they're all under DHS doesn't mean they're the same.
Right, right, right. And I remember that happening in the '70s. There was a time in the '70s where Mira could actually come into town and pick people up. I remember back in the day because they came to my house one time when I was a kid, and somebody called a Mira on us. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And but things are different, and it's gone back to that because of the mere numbers. There was a situation in South Tucson where they're trying to pit local police versus ICE because a woman got pepper sprayed by ICE, and so now they want to call in a claim, a report of an assault, right? So then it pits. Well, and I talked to one of the local cops there that says, "Bro, there's nothing we can do about it. We
Right.
there's it isn't an assault. It was done in an official capacity, affecting an arrest." Now, tell me, why do you think, in your estimation, why are these local mayors like Regina Romero in Tucson and the mayors in Nogales, places like that in Douglas and all these, even in, up north, why do you think these mayors are just pushing back? What do you think it is?
This is the problem. Like when it comes to this situation, it's turned into a race issue, plain and simple.
Yes.
And they
Right.
realize that if they pull on the heartstrings of it being a race issue, it allows people to keep voting for them. They want to be looked at as the nice people. And they sit there and they say, look, I'm Hispanic, you're Hispanic, I care about you. These guys are the bad guys. They're the bad guys. And if you don't vote for me, the bad guys are going to get rid of all brown people. Like they really push that narrative. And
Right.
unfortunately, there's a lot of people that believe it. I was down in South
They do.
Tucson. I was playing in a softball team, and I was down there picking up uniforms, and I was talking to one of the owner, and this was back when Raul Grijalva was in office, right? And I asked him about it. I believe it was back when Raul Grijalva said to boycott Arizona.
Oh, I remember
So I
that.
asked him, remember, and I asked him, I said, hey man, Grijalva said boycott Arizona. How's that affecting you? And he said, man, this guy really has ruined our businesses. It's hard on us. We're having difficulty, making payroll and paying our bills because he said that, and it's very damaging. And I told him, well, elections are coming up, now's the time. And he looked at me and he says, yeah, but he's Hispanic, bro. We got to vote for him. And I just
Right.
sat there and I was in shock, bro. And I'm like thinking, here
Right.
you have an individual that not only is not doing anything for you, but he's actively destroying your livelihood. And you're going to
Yeah, I
vote for
remember
him
that time.
because he's Hispanic. And I think that's
Right.
where the problem is. We can do these shows, and I love being on with you, and I love doing the shows. I love being on Fox, Newsmax. But you know what? I love being on groups like Telemundo, Univision, even CNN, because that's the only way we're going to move the needle. Is we explain it to people, and maybe you're not going to change a lot of minds, but if you plant a seed on one, it makes a difference. And I think I see that because I grew up in Douglas, right? So a lot of the people there, they did not like Border Patrol. They looked at
Right.
him as the bad guys, and my dad showed me how to respect law enforcement like my entire life.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so I really loved the border patrol agents growing up. Obviously, the border patrol station in Douglas was so much smaller back then, um, but now it's evolved. They're bigger. I'm on my social media, and when I put down my heroes in green, I really truly mean that. Like I really truly mean that because people need to understand law enforcement. Depending on where you are, sometimes you get respect, sometimes you don't. Border Patrol agents wake up every morning, especially now, right? They put their uniform on and they need to cover up or they need to wait till they get to the station. They try not to tell their neighbors that they're Border Patrol agents. I mean, these guys are putting their lives on the line, but they have to hide it. They have to
Right.
hide
It's
that they're
terrible,
Border
man.
Patrol agents. And people don't
The
understand that.
yeah, the you mentioned the mayors, right? The local, townships, mayors, stuff like that, who are anti migra, right? You're right. They're like the Disneyland parent who can't say no to their
Yes.
kid. No matter how much of a bad kid your kid is, they say, "Yes,
Yep.
mijo, okay, we'll get it. We'll go to Disneyland." And
Yeah.
we
Get him
have to
that
be
stupid
the
whistle that he's going to lose tomorrow.
and we have to be that parent that says, "Mira, you misbehaved. You're not going to go to Disneyland." You know what I mean? But I think a lot of the problem lies in the immigration process. The immigrant, like, for example, I became a U.S. citizen. Eventually, I was probably 20. I'm in my Army Class A uniform, and I'm being sworn in as a U.S. citizen after I had already been sworn in as a soldier like a year,
Right.
2 years before that. Okay. So the immigration system is very complex. And unfortunately, it is complex. And I think they need to simplify it if they can. And so that people who want to follow the law in Mexico so that they can, in fact, immigrate lawfully. You can still do it today. It's just it can be complex. It's very
No,
time
this is the
consuming.
you're hitting so many points, and I'm going to tell you something. This is where I was frustrated, right? And so I didn't deal with that part. I was more the enforcement border patrol, but you cross over and you talk to people from all realms within the immigration. And I didn't know this. And when I found out, I was frustrated. So say you're trying to become a citizen or immigrate into the United States somehow, right? And you file some type of paperwork, some type of process. The person that gets your file, they look at it and they work off of what you filed. There may be another avenue, that's easier for you to be here, but they won't tell you that. And I always would say, well, can he apply for this instead? And they said, yeah, but that's not what he applied for. Well, why don't you tell the guy or the girl, hey, dude, like, I know you're applying for this, but you can actually just apply for this and make it easier. They won't tell you
That
that.
is
And that's
government.
what pisses
That
me
is
off.
government. That's government work 101.
It's
I know
crazy,
that
Lou. It's
because
crazy.
they'll look at you and they'll say, "Okay," and
Yeah,
because they look at it as it's not my job. But
it's
can
crazy
you
to
just do your
me.
job a little bit beyond and just hey check J1, V1, as whatever these visas are, and
Yes,
just let
find
us
out if
know.
there's another way. You know where
Yeah,
I learned a lot of this frustration? I remember being, and I come from the prison background, so I worked in the prison, and you had to
yeah,
be on top of things. And your partner, he was your partner, and we were side by side, and we backed each other up. No matter the pay was horrible, okay, the pay was
yeah.
not good, and it still isn't. But we would sure as hell back each other up because it's you and your partner against 400 inmates. So we backed
Right.
each other up, and we made sure that we were on top of things, even if it wasn't your job. I come over to Border Patrol, I remember, and I'm in the control room picking up some paper, and there's a guy sitting there, and the phone was ringing. All right. I remember telling him, hey, dude, are you going to get the phone? And he says, I'm not assigned to this building. I'm just here waiting.
That's the
Dude,
problem with government work. Overpaid in many cases, and they stay within the box. You know what
it's
I mean?
crazy to me, though,
Maybe we
Lou.
can
Like,
change
it's
that. And
common sense
Art,
should help.
Art, when you become king, Mister King del Cueto, maybe things will be different. You know.
Everyone
Speaking
answers the
of
damn
king,
phone. Everyone has to answer the phone.
speaking of kings, how is King Trump doing? How is he doing? What are the guys saying in the field? How do they feel now? What are they thinking? What are they telling you?
Look, it's good to have somebody in a leadership position, in this case, the president of the United States, that
Right.
actually backs up law enforcement as a whole. Um, and again, my opinion is some of the issues that still pop up is, you hear about draining the swamp, but there's people that have been in leadership positions either at the stations or within DHS or whatever it may be, that were there through different administrations. And I think some of them, they've learned how to play the game, and they know what to say, when not to say it. And I think that's where some of the frustration works. Look, that's some of the reason why I retired. I was eligible to retire. People come up to me and say, "Oh, you retired at the wrong time. Now you have President Trump there. You could have done your job." Guys, I was doing my job with every president that was there. The president didn't prevent me from doing my job. The rules of
Correct.
the job changed, right? But you were still doing your job. People coming across asking for asylum, that's part of the job. That's always been part of the job. Unfortunately, it took away from other enforcement areas because you had to do that. But the
Yeah.
job was
Yeah.
always being done. Now, um, I left at the same time because I've always been very vocal. Look, and like I said, look, a week into patrol, actually at my station, I'm wearing a cowboy hat. Someone gets bothered, and I'm like, I'm not going to take it off. Like, no one's going to take it off of me. So little issues like that, I admit it, that has caused me problems. I was talking to a good friend of mine recently, and I said, you know what? The one huge regret that I have is that I never joined the United States military. That's always been a
Mm.
regret. And I know it sounds weird,
Yeah.
especially like someone like you that was in the military, but Lou, it bothers me. It bothers me more than that one girl you forgot to ask out to prom. It bothers me more than that 1978 Trans Am that I never should have sold. It bothers me that I didn't join the military. And my
Yeah.
buddy, who's a Marine, says to me, Art, you never would have made it. You never would have made it because you're too vocal.
You can't wear
And
a
I
hat,
know
cowboy
that,
hat. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. The cavalry, U.S. cavalry, you could have. They have the cavalry hat, man.
right?
You know, they
I've
wore the
always been
cowboy hat.
vocal since day one. And,
Yeah.
if it's wrong, I've called it out. That's
Yeah.
why I got into the bargaining unit area to represent
Mm.
agents, because I saw things that were wrong. But being vocal causes problems, and I know that. I would
Yeah.
ruffle feathers. I would upset a lot of people. I was on the campaign trail with President Trump. People don't know when I did that, I was actually using my vacation time because you can't do
Ándale,
it on duty. It's a hat check
ande.
violation. But people
So
would still
so
call in and start up investigations. I was under investigation probably close to 300 times because of the
cabrón.
issues and because of my loud mouth. So, you
So
know,
as we,
when you're
go
there,
ahead, man.
when you're there and there's an investigation, the president ain't going to be able to clear those investigations because they're internal administrative investigations. And I would have lost my retirement. So I said, no, now's the time. Let's get out of here.
So Art del Cueto, is it Arturo del Cueto or is it Art del Cueto?
It is Arturo.
Eso, Arturo. So what's next for Arturo del Cueto? Where are you? What's next for you, brother? As we wrap up, what is next for you? Where can people find you if you want to be found? Where can
If I want to be
people?
found.
What
So
can?
here's the
What's
thing,
next for you,
Lou.
brother?
Here's the thing. I've been offered jobs from the administration. I've turned them down. I'm still living down here in Arizona. I enjoy
Yeah,
living here. I want to make sure that Arizona is taken care of and it's that the right things are done. Plus, some of these situations, like I get it, like, but when you get guys that are offered like chief of staffs in other fields or in other areas, bro, I've been a lawman my whole life. Okay, I mean, let's call it the way it is. Uh, and
yeah,
I enjoy that aspect of it. So I think moving forward, I want to continue. I've been the voice of the men and women in Border Patrol for a long time, and I still consider myself that voice because I still bring up their issues. I'm still doing interviews left and right, talking about the border issues and what affects them, but I want to be able to expand and talk about all law enforcement because I think all law enforcement doesn't get the credit they deserve in this country. There's a lot of people that work for crappy sheriffs or crappy mayors or crappy chiefs of police that they want to
yeah.
be able to say something and they can't. So I want to be able to be that voice of, hey, send me the problems. I'll voice it for you. And I won't even, hey, if I'm not diming out the department and the girl from Florida that actually said I was the enemy, I sure as heck ain't gonna dime out anyone that sends me anonymous issues and they want to talk about the problems. That's why look, I'm on social media, I'm on X under the Real Art del Cueto AZ. I don't get on there as much as people think I should, and I'm told to get on there, and I should. I do more Instagram than anything else at the Real Art del Cueto. I do Instagram. I'm on
Okay.
Facebook, and I'm starting. I'm trying to get off the ground because I used to have a podcast before when I was part of the bargaining members, and I had a lot of
Yeah.
people that would follow. I'm trying to kick off a YouTube channel. It's called Five Strands with Art del Cueto. The reason it's five strands is because that was the original line of demarcation with the Mexican-U.S. border was five strands of barbed
Okay.
wire. So I call
Okay.
it Five Strands with Art del Cueto. And again, look, this is what it comes down to. Too many of these guys don't have the voice and they're silent because they're scared of repercussions. I want to be able to be that voice. Guys, I've already been under investigation. I've already been in trouble. I got the death threats already. So you know what? Bring it on, man. Just give me a little
Bring
bit
it on,
more.
brother. Hey, Art, man, I want to thank you so much for being here, brother. Thank you for your time. I'm honored that you agreed to be on my show, brother, and I appreciate you being the voice of the men and women of the United States Border Patrol, the voice
Thank
of
you,
the
Lou.
many Americans who are very much pro legal immigration, who love this country. You know what I mean? And so, thank you so much for being Art del
Can I
Cueto,
add
brother.
one
I
more thing,
appreciate that, man.
real quick, Lou? Can I add
Yeah,
something real
please
quick? Please, look,
go ahead.
para, para toda la gente latina, no dejen que un gobierno o un tipo de persona los esté dividiendo. Realmente Estados Unidos ama a personas de todas partes, pero tiene que haber una forma legal de cómo entrar a Estados Unidos. Personas como Lu, personas como yo y muchos de nuestros familiares han venido a este país porque es el mejor país del mundo. Y si venimos a este
Señor.
país es para progresar y para seguir esas reglas. Entonces, no dejen que un grupo o un partido los divida o nos divida. Realmente todos queremos un mejor futuro, pero lo tenemos que hacer legalmente. La forma de levantar a nuestra raza es enseñar que podemos seguir las leyes de un país y estamos agradecidos de este país. Thank you, Lou.
So I love it. Muchísimas gracias, Arturo. Arturo del Cueto. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And if you like what you saw today, give it a like, give it a subscribe. If you didn't like what you saw today, post a comment. I want to know your thoughts. And if you know anyone out there who's got an incredible story, who's doing great things while helping the community themselves, they have their family, I want to hear about them. Shoot me a message. Email me, loupember@gmail.com. I want to hear their stories because people need their stories be told. Thank you all. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe. I'll talk to you all very soon. Adelante, Art.